So please do send in your views. Was he telling the truth? Or is he balkanizing and dividing the nation? Let's discuss this right now. We have Dennis Itumbi, Director at State House. Thanks for joining us. Patrick Gathara, cartoonist and communications consultant. And we have Isaac Mwaura, a member of the National Assembly. Thank you all, gentlemen, for coming. So let's start with you, Isaac Mwaura. Do you agree with much of what David Ndii was talking about in his article? Have we lost our sense of nationalism? Is this no longer working, and are we lying to ourselves?
Yes, it is very true. We have lost our sense of nationalism. In fact, what we currently have is token nationalism. I think when I sit in the National Assembly, I see if it's a name that is proposed, Luo, it's okay. If it's Kikuyu, it's okay, depending on where you come from. But if it's the other side, it's not okay. And many of the time that I ask myself, really, where did we actually lose it? We are extremely tribal. You just need to see even the surname of somebody and you'll actually predict their political opinion. So we have sunk very low, and I think Kenya's a project. In fact, interestingly, I was having this conversation on Friday with some two guys, and of course there were people who are very optimistic about nationalism. It is not lost to me that in the 2009 census, only 600,000 Kenyans said that they are Kenyans. The rest were identifying themselves from their tribes. So the project Kenya, in terms of nationalism, and not the state, you know, in terms of the political power and the functions of government, the nationalism, that is the culture of a people, has completely failed. We see ourselves more as belonging to a tribal ethnic communities, micronationalities, which have a clearly defined structure with a tribal leader, and it is out of that. You know, you have to stand on the bedrock of ethnicity for you to claim nationalism. And this is not something that is on one side of the political divide. It's as robust on both sides of the political divide.
Okay,
yes.
All right. Dennis, he talks about, and I quote in his article, "We're now hurtling towards another election more ethnically polarized and angry than ever before."
I don't know what study he bases it on, because if speaking from an intellectual point, then I expected to see some research. But however, I would be wrong not to admit that, of course, even reading from the social media discourse, from the media reactions, even from social conversations that are away from any of the media, there is some element of anger. There is, in terms of communicating even what government has done, is not going to the real person. I mean, I've just come in from the farm in Embo, and speaking to farm boys there, speaking to the guys around the village, the feedback they give you may not be Ndii because they don't know him. They never read his article. They don't even know whether he exists or not. But there is an anger that their coffee, you know, their coffee is not selling at the price that sold last year. They have just gotten a price. There's an issue about maize.
Their state of living, their economics, rather than...
Let me say this. This article, in my opinion, talked about nationalism, which Mheshimiwa has spoken about, but spoke about connectedness of the society, that the societies need to connect. And that is where the article ended. He assumed that now then you would connect from there everything else that has not been connected. But when you look at whether or not there has been connection, that is what has been done by this generation and the past generation from 1963. This nation was not built by intellectuals. It was built by people who went to the forest to fight. Then the second liberation happened in 1990, 1991. And yes, there were lawyers. Yes, there were people like the versions of Mheshimiwa Gathara and myself, who were journalists at that time, who were people who were hookers at that time.
Yeah, but he's talking about some of these squandered opportunities. Do you think those opportunities were squandered?
Like every other nation, there are opportunities that should have been taken. But even at KTN, there are stories you will go find as you're coming to work, but you may never be able to tell that story to fit the editorial policy of KTN. So there are some things you miss. It does not necessarily mean that the nation is compromised as a result.
I think my take is that, yes, there have been very many squandered opportunities. For example, really at the beginning of the nation, you actually find political ideology almost being tribalized.
Do we have political ideologies?
Yes, it was there initially, about socialism and capitalism.
Okay.
So then we say that we are social democrats, but then you find the Kikuyu side becoming more capitalistic, the Luo side, and I'm being very honest here, becoming more socialistic because of the cultures that underlay these communities and how they have come. Now, Yvonne, there's a question that people don't seem to answer. When a leader is in power and they feel threatened by the opposition, what do? Do they continue building the national project? They tend to look inwardly and become exclusionist. And the moment they do so, therefore, then a narrative is created that then the people in power are the ones who are oppressing us. And that narrative in itself is cash, because it's also used to rally the other people, against the regime. Okay. So the perpetuation of these two dichotomies is not by default, is by design.
Interesting. Patrick?
Well, I think to go back to your initial question, whether I agree with what Ndii wrote, I think a lot of what he describes is real and true. But I do disagree with his prescriptions. Okay,
that's your point of departure?
And I think we need to be careful when we're discussing the article that we actually try and be accurate about what Ndii was saying.
Right.
He says that the project to imagine Kenya, because all nations are to an essence are imagined communities, because contrary to what you're saying, nobody can connect with everybody in a nation. So you've got to imagine it, And what he's been saying, what he was saying is that we've missed opportunities over and over to push a national narrative, a narrative that brings us together, that gives people a grasp or a say or a stake in the country. And what's happened is, when he says the tribe has eaten the nation, is that the elite has actually preferred to sell the narrative of tribe. Now, my departure from him starts with the idea that Kenya is a marriage of communities, which it isn't. It's a marriage of elites. We inherited the state we call Kenya from the colonialists. And what happened is, from 1963 till now, we have not reformed that state. And just as the British used divide and rule methods, favored some tribes over others, essentially so to keep control and to also mask the fact that they were taking from everybody else, the elite has done the same. They sell the narrative of tribes, and everybody coalesces around those, but it is used in essence to hide the fact that everybody, it's not that the state favors some tribe, it's stealing from everybody, but allows some to keep a little so that we can fight over those crumbs. And let
me put out something here. It's good also to get the background of where the author of this particular article has come from. In his own articles, over time, he's admitted that he was an advisor to the committee of experts, especially on the financial clauses, the money clauses. And then in his own articles, and also from general media coverage and basically national development, we know that he applied for a job to be the commissioner of CRA and lost to Mika Chesarem in an independent interview, and consequently appointment was done by the former President Kibaki and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga in what was a national accord in concurrence and agreement. So he was not picked in that, he lost that thing. And if you look at his articles, almost all of them have a narrative around CRA, criticizing CRA. So I'm not going to whether or not all that gets in. Then I'll get to Mwaura. No, I'll get to that. I will say why I'm mentioning it.
Right, yes.
Mheshimiwa Mwaura says a few Kenyans said, I am Kenyan during the census. My recollection of the census is that there was a big NGO campaign. I'm sure Gathara may have a better insight than I have, but there was a big NGO campaign for many Kenyans not to answer that question. So as a result, many Kenyans did not actually answer the question, and some answered. So we cannot really say the other Kenyans answered the other way around. But let's put it this way. When we say connecting a people in a nation, there are things that connect them. One is their laws, because their laws apply equally to all of them. And when this country went to Naivasha to make a decision on whether we wanted to be a unitary state or we wanted to be a federal state, we decided, or the people who sat in Naivasha decided to present a unitary state. Then the Kenyan people had an opportunity to reject that narrative at the referendum in 2010. What happened? 7 of what now Ndii says, 7 of the regions that Ndii says now should secede, 7 of them disagreed with that narrative and,
so you're talking about the
for
law.
A unitary state. It's very important to push that point. Out in the referendum results, it's very clear. The referendum results, 7 of the.
But Ndii is not saying that countries should secede. I mean, it's a conditional prescription. We've got to understand that. What he's saying is that if we are going into a polarized election, and he says that if there is a sham win, and we've got to underline the word sham. It's quite important. People keep ignoring it. If there's a sham win, he says the country will burn. Then what do we do thereafter? And that's why he says that we should consider are going our separate ways. Now, I disagree with him.
You disagree with him
there
at that
because
point, but,
the basis of that prescription is the idea that Kenya is a marriage of tribes, which it is not.
I think, Yvonne, there's something that we are trying to avoid here. First, I disagree with the idea of arguing against the person of David Ndii, like Dennis, my friend, is trying to. That is arguing ad hominem. Let us not discuss the person of Ndii. Let us discuss what he's raising.
But we're discussing
number one is the fact that there is a very clear difference. People are not connected by laws because there is an uneven application of the law. The rich always find a way of buying themselves out of the courts. I mean, we live in this country. But the most important thing that we say, the legitimacy of the state, because there is a nation and there is a state. The legitimacy of the state is not there when people don't feel like they are a nation.
All right, and that's important to raise because he did talk about the state treating some people as second-class citizens, and he's talked about the Somali. And at this point, perhaps, Dennis, you could talk to us about, you know, the role of the state in unifying the nation, because in the war on terror, you know, there's many people who feel that the state has been unfair in its application of that, and that the Somalis, with a number of the operations we've seen against Isili and a number of regions last year, has the feeling that many people feel like, some people feel like they're not part of the state. And that goes directly to the president and the executive.
If you pass a paper here, we'll all probably feel Kikuyu ethnicity here on this side of the panel. So that does not necessarily mean you're being discriminated. It's only that the paper passed. If you land in Kirinyaga, where part of my parentage comes from, you most likely get a majority of Kikuyu. So if most of the terror activity is within the border in Northeastern, the most likely thing you land on, the majority of the people around that strip where that terror activity has happened, you land on a Muslim. So basically, in terms of the government,
there have been, allow me to say that there have been many studies that have proven that terrorist El Gibabwire, who was convicted of terror, he's not a Somali, he's not a Muslim, but he was one of those that was convicted. Yes. So the point being that persons that commit terror aren't necessarily from a specific region.
And by the way, if I may say one thing, the marginalization of the Northeast predates the war on terror or any terrorist activities. In fact, the state has for a long time, and this again goes back to colonial times. The British marginalized the Somalis, and we do the same. We are simply doing what they did, but we are hiding it. We are hiding behind tribes so that we don't see the truth. The truth is, as he mentioned, the rich can buy their way out of our courts. But the rich aren't just Kikuyu, the rich aren't just Luo. The rich are a group, they are elites who tell us that our fight is tribal, when actually it should be a class difference.
You cut me short when I was trying to make a point. The bone of contention here is state capture. And state capture, why people are grumbling, has nothing to do with anything. It's just because they feel that they have not captured the presidency. Let us not lie to ourselves. Because there is a direct correlation between the presidency and access to state resources. So when people say they want to exit the state, which I totally disagree, because even if you are to have small micronationalities, you'll have another new elite, will have sub-clans and what have you. The reason why people are trying to create this narrative is simply because they feel frustrated that they have not been able to capture the presidency.
Is that true? Isaac, that there is a direct correlation between
what you went to cure with the Constitution, actually. One of the major narratives during the constitutional review process is the presidency. In fact, we reduced the presidential powers because our argument, by the way, Ndii argues in a January 2015 article that the presidency's reduction of the presidency's powers was a direct attempt to ensure that the villager determines what their project is. And we achieved it, especially on the financial clauses, because then our budget making process, Parliament stops just being a budget approving system, it also became a budget making system.